3 days. For 3 days, Alessandro Volpe had not eaten. It was a fact known only to a very few. To Leo, his right hand, who watched the untouched plates of prosciutto and melon grow warm on the silver platters. To the chef at Illinois Dominio, his private restaurant, who sent out dish after exquisite dish, only to have them returned, uneaten, a silent rebuke. Alessandro sat in the deep leather chair of his office, a room that felt more like a throne room for a forgotten king. The city glittered below, a galaxy of tiny, insignificant lights. He was the master of this domain. The lion of the West Side. His word was law, his silence a threat. But inside him, there was only a hollow, gnawing void that no food could fill. Leo entered without knocking. Only he had that privilege. Boss. The council meeting is in an hour. You need to eat something. Leo's voice was low, respectful, but edged with a worry he could not completely hide. He placed a small bowl on the vast mahogany desk. Steamed rice. Plain. Simple. An offering of last resort. Alessandro did not look at it. His gaze remained fixed on the window. On the past. Get it out of here, he said. His voice was gravel, unused. Boss, please. Leo, the name was a warning. A single, sharp note of finality. Leo sighed, a sound of defeat. He picked up the bowl and retreated. The door clicked shut, leaving Alessandro alone with the ghosts. 3 days. It was always 3 days. The anniversary. The one date on the calendar that was not marked, yet was more binding than any signed contract. The day his mother, Sophia, had been taken from him. He was just a boy, but he remembered the cold, the silence, and the fading smell of her cooking in their tiny apartment. He pushed himself up from the chair. The suit, tailored to perfection, felt like a cage. He needed air. He needed something other than the sterile, controlled environment he had built for himself. He walked past his guards, a silent phalanx of men who moved with the lethal grace of predators. They tensed, ready to follow. Alone, he commanded. Leo stepped forward, his face a mask of concern. Boss, it's not safe. Nowhere is safe, Leo. But some places are honest. He did not wait for an answer. He walked out of his building, onto the street, and into the cold November wind. The city noise washed over him, a chaotic symphony he usually commanded. Tonight, he was just another shadow in it. He walked without direction, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the dirty pavement. He passed restaurants with bright signs, bakeries with warm, buttery scents. None of it mattered. The hunger he felt was not for the stomach. And then it hit him. A smell. It was faint at first, a whisper on the wind, cutting through the exhaust fumes and the damp chill. It was simple. Rosemary. Garlic. Simmering tomatoes. The earthy, humble aroma of beans and pasta. Pasta e fagioli. It was a peasant's dish. A poor man's meal. It had no place in his world of truffle oil and aged balsamic. But it was the smell of his childhood. It was the smell of his mother's kitchen. He stopped. Very still. Very still. The world seemed to fade away. The traffic, the people, the entire sprawling metropolis dissolved into a blur. There was only the smell. That damned smell. A ghost on the wind, pulling him back through decades of violence and ambition. He followed it. It was a compulsion, an instinct he could not fight. He turned a corner, then another, moving away from the polished avenues of his territory and into the older, grittier streets where the city showed its age. He found the source at the end of a narrow, dimly lit block. A small, battered food cart, a single propane burner hissing bravely against the cold. A woman stood behind it, her movement slow, deliberate, and sure. She stirred a large pot, the source of the impossible aroma, the steam rising to wreathe her head like a halo. She was blind. He could tell by the way she tilted her head, listening to the city. By the way her hands moved with a practiced certainty that did not rely on sight, finding the ladle, the stack of paper bowls, the loaf of crusty bread, all by touch and memory. A white cane leaned against the side of the cart. Alessandro watched from the shadows. His entire security detail was likely in a panic, scrambling to locate him. Let them. For the first time in 3 days, the hollow ache inside him had a focal point. It was here, at this shabby little cart, with this blind woman and her pot of ghosts. He saw a young man, thin and shivering in a threadbare jacket, approach the cart. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "Is that enough for a small bowl?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The woman smiled, a gentle, unpracticed thing. "It's cold tonight, son. Everyone eats. Pay what you can, if you can." She ladled a generous portion into a bowl, her hand steady. She broke off a large chunk of bread and placed it on top. The young man took it, his hands trembling, and mumbled a thank you before scurrying away into the darkness. The woman did not call after him. She simply went back to stirring her pot, a serene island in the chaos of the city. Alessandro felt a crack in the ice that had encased his heart for 40 years. A tiny fissure. He had seen more cruelty and more kindness than most men could imagine, but this simple, unheralded act of grace struck him with the force of a physical blow. He stepped out of the shadows. His footsteps were heavy on the pavement. The woman's head turned towards the sound. She did not flinch. She simply waited. He stood before the cart. The smell was overwhelming now, a tidal wave of memory. He could feel the rough wood of his mother's kitchen table under his boyhood hands. He could hear her humming a song from the old country. He could not speak. The words were trapped behind a wall of grief. The woman tilted her head. "Can I help you?" Her voice was calm, like still water. He cleared his throat. The sound was rough. "The soup. Pasta e fagioli," she confirmed. "My grandmother's recipe. Best on the west side, or so I'm told." A small smile touched her lips again. "Would you like a bowl?" He just nodded, forgetting for a moment that she could not see him. After a beat of silence, he found his voice again. "Yes. Please." She reached for a bowl. Her hands were clean but worn, the knuckles slightly swollen. She ladled the soup, the thick, rich stew filling the container. The scent of rosemary was a prayer. "Bread?" she asked. "Yes." She placed the bread on top and held the bowl out. Her hand was steady, aiming for the space directly in front of her where a customer would stand. He reached out and took it. His fingers, accustomed to the cold steel of a pen or the colder steel of a weapon, brushed against hers. Her skin was warm. He felt a jolt, a current of simple, human connection that he had not experienced in years. It was terrifying. It was liberating. He stood there, holding the bowl, the steam warming his face. He was Alessandro Volpe. The Lion. Men feared his name. But in that moment, he was just a hungry boy, holding a bowl of his mother's soup, made by the hands of a blind stranger. And for the first time, he knew he was going to eat. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about power, kindness, and the debts we owe to the past. The Lion is about to meet his destiny, and it's not in a boardroom or a back alley. It's right here, on this cold, forgotten street corner. If you're enjoying this story, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new tale. And in the comments below, let me know what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Now, let's get back to it. Alessandro held the bowl with both hands, a strange reverence in his grip. The warmth seeped through the paper, a welcome sensation against his cold fingers. He had not held his own food in years. People served him. People provided. He simply consumed. This simple act of holding a bowl felt foreign, almost sacred. He needed to taste it. Now. He looked around. The street was empty save for the flickering lamppost and the woman at her cart. He could not eat here, like a common vagrant. It was a matter of pride, of habit. But the thought of returning to the sterile silence of his office, of having Leo see him with this humble meal, felt like a betrayal of the moment. There was a low stone wall bordering a shuttered storefront a few feet away. He walked over and sat down, balancing the bowl on his knees. The stone was cold and hard beneath him. He didn't care. The woman, Ilara, he would later learn her name was, remained at her post. She began to wipe down her small counter with a clean cloth, her movements efficient and graceful. She was in her own world, a world of scent and sound and touch. A world he had just trespassed into. He picked up the plastic spoon. It felt flimsy and cheap in his powerful hand. He dipped it into the soup. The beans were soft, the pasta was tender, the broth was a deep, rich red. It looked right. It looked exactly like the image held in his memory for 4 decades. He lifted the spoon to his lips. The taste exploded on his tongue. It was not just rosemary and garlic. It was the exact balance. The hint of oregano she must have used. The specific type of olive oil, slightly peppery. The way the beans had broken down just enough to thicken the broth without turning to mush. It was his mother's soup. Not a copy. Not a similar recipe. It was hers. A memory, sharp and painful and beautiful, sliced through him. He was 10 years old. He had a fever, and his mother, Sophia, was sitting on the edge of his bed, feeding him this very soup. Her hand was cool on his forehead. Her voice was a soft lullaby. Eat, Alessandro. This will make you strong. This is love in a bowl. A tear slid down his cheek. Hot and surprising. He had not cried since that day. He did not know he still could. He wiped it away angrily with the back of his hand, his cufflink scratching his skin. He was the lion. He did not cry. But the soup was a truth he could not deny. He ate another spoonful. And another. He ate with a desperate, primal hunger that shocked him. It was not just food. It was life. It was memory. It was absolution. He tore off a piece of the crusty bread and dunked it into the broth, just as he had done as a boy. The bread softened, soaking up the flavor, and he ate it in one bite, closing his eyes. He finished the entire bowl in minutes. He scraped the bottom with the plastic spoon until it made a scratching sound. He felt full. For the first time in a very long time, the void inside him had been filled, not with food, but with something else. Something warm. He looked over at the woman. Ilara. She was packing up, her movement signaling the end of her night. She poured the remaining soup into large containers, likely to be given away or saved for the next day. The fire in the burner was extinguished, and the small cart seemed to shrink in the growing darkness. He needed to know. He stood up, his body feeling strangely lighter. He walked back to the cart, the empty bowl in his hand. She heard his approach. Was it to your liking? She asked, her back still to him. It was, he struggled for the word. Perfect was too small. Good was an insult. It was familiar. She turned then, her face angled towards his voice. Her eyes were a pale, cloudy blue, beautiful and sightless. Familiar is good. It means it tasted like home. My mother, he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. She made this soup. A real smile bloomed on her face now. A smile of shared understanding. Ah, a classic. Every Italian mother has her own version. No, he said, his voice firm, insistent. Not her version. This version. Exactly this version. The way the rosemary is crushed, not chopped. The hint of pepper. The beans, borlotti beans, but cooked until they are creamy. He was rambling, he knew. He was revealing a part of himself he kept locked away from the world. But he could not stop. The woman's smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion, of dawning curiosity. How could you know that? Tell me, he commanded, his voice slipping back into its familiar tone of authority. He softened it immediately. Please. Tell me. This recipe. Where did you get it? She hesitated, a flicker of apprehension on her face. She was a blind woman, alone on a dark street with a strange, intense man. She had every right to be afraid. It was my grandmother's, she said slowly. She worked as a seamstress, many years ago. In a small apartment building on 10th Avenue. 10th Avenue. His blood ran cold. That was where he had grown up. Her best friend in the building, Ilara continued, her voice now a soft, reminiscent whisper, was a woman named Sophia. They were like sisters. They shared everything. Recipes, secrets, sorrows. My grandmother said Sophia made the best pasta e fagioli in the whole city. She taught my grandmother how to make it, insisted she learn it exactly. A special trick with the rosemary, she said. Sophia. The name hung in the air between them, a fragile, shimmering thing. Alessandro felt the ground shift beneath his feet. This was not a coincidence. This was fate. This was a message from a ghost, delivered by an angel on a forgotten street corner. This woman, this blind vendor, was not a stranger. She was a link. A living, breathing piece of a past he thought was buried forever. Her grandmother had been his mother's friend. They had shared laughter and food in that tiny, cramped apartment while he, a small boy, played on the floor. He remembered another woman now. A kind face, quick to laugh, who would sneak him a piece of candy. He had never known her name. He had just called her Zia, aunt. My grandmother's name was Isabella, Ilara said softly. Isabella. Zia Isabella. The world tilted on its axis. He gripped the edge of the cart to steady himself. His knuckles were white. I knew her, he whispered. The admission was torn from him. Before Ilara could process this, before this fragile, impossible connection could be explored, the night was shattered by a new sound. A harsh, grating voice. Well, well. Look what we have here. A man stepped out of the alleyway beside the shuttered store. He was short and stocky, with the arrogant swagger of a man who mistakes cruelty for strength. His cheap suit was too tight, and his eyes were small and greedy. Alessandro recognized the type instantly. A bottom feeder. A parasite. The man ignored Alessandro completely, his eyes fixed on Ilara. Closing up shop, sweet thing? You forgot something. Ilara stiffened. Her face, which had been open and full of wonder, became a shuttered mask of dread. She knew this man. This was not his first visit. Marco, she said, her voice tight. I have nothing for you. Oh, I think you do, the man, Marco, sneered. He gestured at her cart, at the containers of leftover soup. You had a good night. I saw you. Lots of customers. The street is safe, the business is good. That's because of me. Because of my associates. Protection costs money. He took a step closer, his eyes lingering on the cash box she had just locked. Alessandro did not move. He watched. His mind, which had been reeling with memory and emotion, was suddenly sharp. Cold. Crystal clear. He saw the situation for what it was. A weasel preying on a songbird. This was his territory. Every business, from the high-end nightclubs to the hot dog stands, paid tribute. It was the cost of doing business, yes, but it came with a guarantee. It came with real protection. It came with order. This man, Marco, was an unauthorized collector. A freelancer, poaching on his grounds. But that was not what made Alessandro's blood turn to ice. It was the target. There were rules. Unwritten, but absolute. You do not touch children. You do not harm women for sport. And you do not, under any circumstances, prey on the helpless. The sick, the old, the infirm. A blind woman, working to make an honest living with her grandmother's recipe, she was sacrosanct. To threaten her was not just a crime. It was a sin. It was a profound act of disrespect to the entire order of things. Marco reached out, his grubby hand moving towards Ilara's arm. "Don't make this difficult, lady. Just give me my cat." "I told you," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "I have nothing for you." She took a step back, bumping into her cart. That was the moment. The moment Alessandro Volpe made a decision. His internal world, the one filled with ghosts and grief, collided with his external world of power and violence. This man, this insignificant thug, had just trespassed in both. He had threatened the legacy of Sofia Volpe and he had broken the code of Alessandro Volpe. He would not stand for it. Alessandro took a step forward, the empty soup bowl still in his hand. He placed it gently on the cart's counter. The sound, a soft click, was shockingly loud in the tense silence. Marco finally turned, noticing Alessandro for the first time. He sized him up. He saw an older man in an expensive suit. A rich man, probably lost. A potential victim. "What do you want, old man?" Marco snarled. "This doesn't concern you. Get lost before you get hurt." Alessandro looked at the weasel. He did not see a threat. He saw a problem that needed to be solved. Permanently. He met Marco's gaze. He did not speak. He did not have to. He let the man see what was in his eyes. 40 years of command. 40 years of enforcing his will. The cold, reptilian stillness of a predator that knows the fight is already over. He raised one hand, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture. From the shadows across the street, two figures detached themselves and stepped into the light. Another two materialized from the mouth of the alley. They were large men in long coats. They moved with a terrifying silence, their faces grim and professional. It was Leo and the others. They had found him. They had been watching all along. Marco's arrogant sneer dissolved. His face went pale. The blood drained from it, replaced by the dawning, sickening horror of a man who has just realized he has made a fatal miscalculation. He recognized the men. He recognized their loyalty. He looked back at Alessandro, at the expensive suit and the quiet authority, and finally understood. He was not looking at a rich man. He was looking at the lion. "Boss," Leo said, his voice a low rumble. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes on Marco, but his attention on Alessandro, awaiting the command. Alessandro never took his eyes off Marco. The weasel was trembling now, a pathetic sight. This man, Alessandro said, his voice dangerously quiet, was bothering the lady. It was not a question. It was a death sentence. He was disrespecting her, Alessandro continued, spelling out the man's sins. He was attempting to extort her on my streets. He was threatening a blind woman who works for a living. He paused, letting the weight of the charges settle in the cold night air. He turned his head slightly to look at Ilara. She was standing frozen, her face a mixture of fear and confusion. She could not see what was happening, but she could feel the shift in power. She could hear the terror in Marco's shallow breathing. "This woman," Alessandro said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, "is a friend of my family." That was it. The final nail in Marco's coffin. Leo nodded slowly. He understood. This was not business. This was personal. "Take him," Alessandro said. It was not a shout. It was a whisper. But it carried the weight of an avalanche. Two of the men seized Marco by the arms. He yelped, a pathetic squeak of terror. "Wait! No! I'm sorry," he pleaded, his legs scrambling for purchase as they lifted him off the ground. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know who she was." "That is the point," Alessandro said, turning his back on the pathetic scene. "You should not have to know who she is." He faced Ilara. She was trembling. "What's happening?" she whispered. Who are you? Alessandro looked at this woman, this daughter of his mother's friend. This unwitting keeper of his past. She had given him the first moment of peace he had known in years. And in return, the ugliness of his world had descended upon her. He had to fix it. Leo and his men were dragging the whimpering Marco into the darkness of the alley. His pleas faded into muffled thuds. The matter was being handled. The account was being closed. Alessandro reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. It was a simple, elegant thing of black leather. He took out all the cash he had. It was a thick stack of $100 bills. Several $1,000s. He folded it and tried to press it into Ilara's hand. For the soup, he said. And for the trouble. She flinched back, pulling her hand away as if burned. No. I can't take that. Please, he said. It is an insult to refuse payment. The soup is $5, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. I cannot take more. He looked at the money in his hand. It was worthless. It could buy armies and politicians, but it could not buy the simple dignity of this woman. He had miscalculated again. He was trying to solve this problem with money, the same way Marco had tried to solve his with fear. They were two sides of the same tarnished coin. He had to be better. For her. For his mother's memory. You are right, he said, surprising himself with the admission. He put the money away. Forgive me. He looked at her cart, at the humble tools of her trade. He saw the worn wheels, the dented pot. Tomorrow, he said, a new plan forming in his mind, a better one. Do not bring your cart here. It is too cold for you to be out on the street. But this is how I live, she protested. This is all I have. You will have more, he promised. Across the street. The corner store that is closed down. La Rosa Pastry, it has been empty for a year. I could never afford such a place, she said, a sad laugh in her voice. The rent has been taken care of, Alessandro stated. It was not an offer. It was a fact he had just created. The keys will be delivered to you in the morning. The kitchen is fully equipped. You will have a proper roof over your head. You will sell your soup from a warm place. She was stunned into silence. She could not comprehend the scale of what was happening. Why, she finally whispered. Why are you doing this? Alessandro looked down at the pavement, at the spot where he had eaten the soup. He thought of his mother. He thought of the 40 years of silence and grief. My mother's name was Sophia, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Your grandmother was her friend. They shared soup in a small kitchen a long time ago. They looked out for each other. Today, you reminded me of that. He took a deep breath, the cold air stinging his lungs. As for that man, he said, gesturing vaguely towards the alley from which no more sounds were coming, he will not be bothering you again. He will not be bothering anyone. Ever. The finality in his tone was unmistakable. It was the sound of a ledger being balanced. A debt being paid in a currency far more permanent than cash. Leo emerged from the alley, wiping his hands with a handkerchief. He did not look at Ilara. He looked only at his boss. His face was impassive. The street is clean, boss, Leo said quietly. Alessandro nodded. Help the lady pack up her things. Escort her home. Make sure she is safe. And the other matter? Leo asked. It is closed, Alessandro said. The two words were heavy, absolute. A file closed. A life erased. He turned to leave. He had to get away from this street, from this woman, before he said too much, before he felt too much. Wait, Ilara called out. Her voice stopped him. He turned back. I still don't know your name, she said. He hesitated. His name was a weapon. A shield. A curse. To give it to her felt like a risk. But he owed her the truth. At least a part of it. My friends, he said, thinking of his mother, call me Sandro. He walked away into the night, leaving behind the smell of his mother's soup and the echo of a promise he had every intention of keeping. The void inside him was not gone, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the warmth of pasta e fagioli, and the fierce, unfamiliar burn of a purpose that had nothing to do with power, and everything to do with protection. The next morning, Ilara was woken by a knock at the door of her small apartment. Hesitantly, she opened it. A young man in a crisp suit stood there. He did not say who he was from. He simply handed her a small, heavy object and a large envelope. For Miss Ilara, he said politely, and then he was gone. Her fingers explored the object. It was a key. Old, ornate brass. The envelope contained thick, embossed paper. She asked her neighbor, a kind older woman, to read it to her. It was the deed to the property at the corner of 10th and Elm. La Rosa Pastry. Transferred to her name. Paid in full. There was also a bank statement, showing a new business account opened in her name, with a starting balance that made her neighbor gasp. It was impossible. It was a dream. But the key in her hand was real. Later that day, Alessandro sat in his office. The city glittered below, but today it looked different. It looked like a place of stories, not just assets. Leo stood before him, delivering the morning report. And the delivery was made to Miss Ilara. She has the keys and the account information. The utilities are being transferred to her name. The property is hers, free and clear. Alessandro nodded, staring at a single, perfect red rose in a crystal vase on his desk. He had sent it. A nod to the name of the shop. A silent message. And Marco Bellini? Alessandro asked, his voice flat. His file has been permanently closed, boss, Leo said. He has taken an extended, one-way trip to the bottom of the river. He won't be extorting anyone else. Good. There was a long silence. Leo shifted his weight, something he rarely did. Boss, he began, his voice hesitant. I have been with you for 20 years. I have never seen you, this was not a business decision. The cost of that property, the accounts, for a street vendor. Alessandro turned his chair to face his lieutenant. He looked at the loyal, weathered face of the man who had stood by him through wars and betrayals. You are right, Leo. It was not a business decision. He picked up the rose, careful to avoid the thorns. Some debts are not measured in money. And some profits are not recorded on a balance sheet. He leaned back in his chair, a strange sense of peace settling over him. That woman, her grandmother, was a friend of my mother's. The soup she made, it was my mother's recipe. Exactly. Leo's eyes widened in understanding. The anniversary. The 3 days of fasting. It all clicked into place. This was not about a street vendor. This was about Sofia Volpe. This was about a son's grief. She gave me something I thought I had lost, Leo, Alessandro said, his voice quiet. A memory. For one night, she brought my mother back. Tell me. What is the price for a miracle? Leo had no answer. A week later, Ilara's kitchen opened its doors. It was a simple, warm place. The old pastry cases were gone, replaced by a clean counter and a few small tables. The air was filled with the rich, comforting smell of pasta e fagioli. People came. The old neighbors, the working men, the curious locals. They came for the soup, and they came for the story that was already becoming a local legend. The story of the blind cook and her mysterious, powerful benefactor. Alessandro did not visit. He knew his presence would bring the wrong kind of attention. But he watched. From his car parked across the street. From the reports Leo gave him. He saw the line of customers. He saw the smile on Ilara's face, no longer tinged with worry, but full of a quiet, confident joy. He had used his power, his violence, his darkness, to create a small pocket of light in the world. It was a strange, unsettling feeling. One evening, he sent Leo in. Not as a guard, but as a customer. "Bring me a bowl," he ordered. Leo returned a few minutes later with a large container. It was still hot. Alessandro opened it in the back of his car, the steam fogging the windows. He ate it slowly, the taste just as perfect as he remembered. Tucked under the lid was a small, folded piece of paper. He opened it. It was a note written in the shaky but determined hand of Ilara's neighbor. For Sandro, it read, "Thank you. I hope this tastes like home. E." He folded the note carefully and put it in his wallet, next to the faded picture of his mother he had carried for 40 years. He had resolved the crisis. He had provided a new beginning. But the story was not over. He felt a connection to this woman, a responsibility. He had torn a hole in the fabric of her life by removing Marco, and he had patched it with gold. But the threads were still there. He had to see her. One more time. He waited until she was closing up. The last customer had left, and she was wiping down the tables, her movements still as graceful as they were at the cart. He knocked on the glass door. She turned, startled. "We're closed." "It's Sandro," he said through the glass. She fumbled with the lock for a moment, then opened the door. "Sandro. You shouldn't be here. People talk." "Let them talk," he said, stepping inside. The warmth and the smell of the shop enveloped him. It was a sanctuary. "I came to see if the investment was sound." She smiled. "It is. Business is good. Too good," almost. She gestured around the small, clean kitchen. "This is all too much." "It is what you deserve," he said. He saw the large pot on the stove, still half full. "You paid me back for my meal with a note. But there is the matter of the shop." He reached into his coat. She held up a hand. "Please. No more money. I can't accept it. I will never be able to repay you for this." "You already have," he said, his voice low and intense. He did not pull out his wallet. Instead, he pulled out a crumpled, $5 bill. "I believe this is what I owe you for the first bowl." He placed the bill on the counter. A symbolic exchange. A resetting of the scales, not in the world's eyes, but in theirs. She reached out, her fingers finding the bill. She touched it for a moment, then pushed it back towards him. "No," she said softly. "That one was a gift. For a grieving son." His breath caught in his throat. How could she know? "I may be blind, Sandro," she said, her head tilted as if she were reading his very soul, "but I am not deaf. I heard the pain in your voice that night. This soup, it wasn't just a meal for you. It was a memory. And giving someone a memory of their mother, that is something that cannot have a price." He was speechless. This woman, with her sightless eyes, saw him more clearly than anyone. "People in the neighborhood," she continued, her voice hesitant, "they whisper about you. They say you are a dangerous man. They call you the lion." She took a small step closer. "Are you a bad man, Sandro?" The moral question. The one he had asked himself 1,000 times in the dark of night. Was he a villain? A protector? A monster? A king? He looked at her earnest, open face. He could not lie to her. But he could not tell her the whole truth, either. "I am what I need to be," he answered, the words tasting like ash and iron. "For many people, I am a very bad man. But the world is not a simple place. Sometimes, to protect the lambs, you need a lion." He paused, his gaze softening. "But tonight," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "because of you. I got to be the good guy." A tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. "Thank you," she whispered. He felt an overwhelming urge to protect her. Not just from thugs like Marco, but from the world. From everything. He took out a simple, stark white business card from his pocket. It had no name, no address. Just a single phone number, embossed in black. "This number," he said, pressing the card into her hand. "It will always be answered. Day or night. If anyone ever bothers you again, if you ever need anything, a leaky faucet, a new bag of flour, a shoulder to cry on, you call this number. Do you understand?" She clutched the card in her hand. It was his promise. His shield. "I understand," she said. He knew he should leave. But he couldn't. He stood there, in the warm, fragrant kitchen, a world away from his cold, empty empire. He was a king in a foreign land, and he did not want to go home. 1 year later. The office of Alessandro Volpe was the same. The leather chair, the mahogany desk, the glittering city below. But something had changed. On a small, dedicated shelf, there was a row of simple objects. A dried sprig of rosemary. A small, smooth stone from the street outside Ilara's shop. A folded paper note. And every Tuesday, at precisely 6 o'clock, a container of hot pasta e fagioli was delivered. It was his new ritual. His memento. Leo entered, no longer with worry, but with a quiet sense of routine. He placed the container on the desk. "From Ilara's, boss," he said. "She said the tomatoes this week are especially good." Alessandro nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "She is well." "She is thriving," Leo confirmed. "Her kitchen is the most popular lunch spot in the district. Everyone knows she is under your protection. No one would dare bother her." "Good," Alessandro said. He opened the container. The smell, once a ghost of a memory, was now a comforting presence. It was the smell of home. A home he had not realized he was building. Ilara's kitchen was more than a restaurant now. It was a community center. It was a haven. Ilara, the blind cook, was the heart of the neighborhood. She hired local kids who needed a job. She gave away the unsold soup at the end of each night. She had become a force for good, a small but powerful light, all because a feared crime boss had been hungry for a memory. Their relationship had settled into a quiet, unspoken rhythm. He was her unseen guardian. She was his anchor to a world he thought he had lost. They rarely spoke, but they were in constant communication. A new brand of flour delivered to her shop was a message. An extra piece of bread in his soup container was a reply. It was a language of quiet care, spoken across a divide of darkness and light. Sometimes, late at night, he would drive by her small apartment, just to see the light on in the window, a confirmation that she was safe. He was her protector, her shadow, her lion. And she, in her own way, was his. She had saved him from the ghost of his past, not by vanquishing it, but by giving it a place to rest. True strength is not always found in power and control. Sometimes, it is found in vulnerability. It is the courage to feel, to remember, and to act not out of anger, but out of love. Alessandro Volpe was a man who ruled a city with an iron fist, but his redemption did not come from a grand gesture or a bloody war. It came from a bowl of soup, a forgotten recipe, and the quiet dignity of a blind woman who reminded him that the most valuable things in this world are not bought or sold, but are given freely, from one heart to another. And that is a lesson worth more than any empire.